great to have you with us. We are, I don't know, we're not so used to hybrid events. We've had a couple, but it's great to be back in person with people and some community members and faces that haven't been together for a while. So thank you for joining us. We are so pleased to have a really esteemed panel with us today and to have a really important conversation. And you know, some of the things that I've experienced at work and in the DEI work that I do has really brought the importance of this conversation to the forefront for me. I just have seen us all navigating in different ways and trying to find these conversations as close as possible. They just don't happen enough. And I was like, well, I met my friend Saraya and I said, we're going to create this because she saw the importance of it as well. So I owe so much to my collaborator and friend and also Blanca, who really helped formulate this, bring it into a restorative kind of lens as we talk about navigating a conversation that's really challenging. So here we are, and in the way that Courageous Conversations approaches things, we create a container and then we'll get started. So that's what I'm here to do. My name is Karen Rose-Warren, forgive me for not introducing myself. I'm one of the co-founders of Courageous Conversations towards Racial Justice. We've been doing this work since 2016 and pretty much have had a conversation close to monthly. You know, and sometimes it's a conversation, sometimes it comes in art form, sometimes it's theater, sometimes it's a standout against racism where we drew 3,000 people that one summer, which was amazing. So we've been at it and just really enjoy and understand the importance of keeping the work going. So in creating a container for the conversation, it means that we decide how we all have a conversation in a way that doesn't do harm, and we admit may cause discomfort. Taking the time to create the container together builds our capacity to then have these hard conversations. When we are in brave space, it asks us to reserve judgment, and if we feel some discomfort or judgment, pause, breathe, reflect, understand perhaps what's coming up for us, why is it uncomfortable, and what can I learn from the way that I'm feeling. So with that, I am happy to pass the mic over to, as I said, my collaborator, Saraya, and Blanca. And I apologize, I'll look at the bios over here. So, Saraya, introducing Saraya Caballero, who is a Colombian woman, advocate, coach, counselor, dedicated to working with individuals from marginalized communities who have experienced complex trauma and approach grounded in turning pain into purpose through community care and collective healing, passionate. And she's passionate about the arts. So Saraya, thank you. Welcome. And next, yeah.
All right, thank you so much. I just wanted to take the time here to thank everybody for being here tonight and really set the intentions for tonight. I think this event, as Karen said, came together through us just really wanting to bring a conversation about the Latin conversation, discussion around the intersection of color, race, and culture. And this is a conversation that happens in a lot of spaces, and Karen especially wants to give her a big thank you for her organization to be able to do this conversation because she saw the need and the want. And so us coming together and bringing together this beautiful panel of people will be a great way to share and talk about this and just bring it to the Milton community as well. And the intention for tonight is really to hold a healing conversation around this and to do some truth sharing and storytelling and be able to share this in community and just have everyone who's sitting here to be able to hold space for each other as well as for the people in the audience to walk away with some learnings hopefully. And with that being said, this conversation, as Karen mentioned, will be done in a restorative context. So Blanca will be helping us facilitate that as well as Julio, who is our moderator for the night. So I will introduce both of them. So Julio is a journalist and MSNBC columnist, founder of Latino Rebels, proud Milton resident since 2001. He is father to both amazing 20-something-year-old children who are products of Milton Public Schools, so a Milton native. And then Blanca, she's a Boricua licensed clinician, a trainer and a teacher, a healer and a coach. Blanca founded Vida Wellness and Counseling in 2022, an organization committed to the healing, wellness, and liberation of communities of color. Vida Wellness and Counseling seeks to transform wellness through collective liberation, radical healing, and reclaiming of ancestral healing practices. So Blanca will now come up to introduce herself, and we can do some intros for the speakers. Thank you.
Buenas noches, good evening everyone. Blanca Valentin, she, her, ella. I'm very pleased to be here. And so some of you may wonder, what is a restorative conversation? So I'm going to be really brief in describing what that is. When we talk about ancestral practices, one of the ways in which I group my work is in circle practice. As a trainer, as a participant, and pretty much up through my life, what I have done is, been in circle. And so when we talk about restorative practices, there's 4 R's or 4 elements that I want to bring into this space today. One of them is recognizing that their harm has happened, right? And when we recognize that harm has happened, we're able to repair and work towards recovering with the relationships, right? And so it is okay to talk about things that have harmed us. It is okay to talk about things that are painful, but it's just as important for us to recognize that healing takes place when we talk about stories that have had this type of impact. And with a title such as Complex Intersection of Culture, Color, and Race, that complexity does not miss us when we're talking about that. The other R is repair, right? And with repair, there's a level of accountability that says we all contributed to the harm that has happened in ways, whether it's by our silence, whether it's by witnessing. But once we do that, we are able to resist the harm from continuing to happen. And so part of that is, how do we hold each other and ourselves accountable so that we could understand the level of harm that has happened with the umbrella of hope. And so what we're hoping to do today is create a container where we're able to tell our stories, right? Combine those with the joy, right? Because there's also joy in some of these stories, the pain, but also the healing attached to our stories. Right? And so when you do that in community, an important level of accountability includes community action. And so when you do this in community, we all could hold each other accountable in this path. Before we continue, it's really, really important that in any restorative conversations that we have community, some people call them ground rules, some people call them agreements. I like to call them, what's my word here? What's the word that I was looking for? Commitments, community commitments. And so we had them, can you show that? I'm not sure, I hope everyone saw the letter acknowledgement earlier today, so we wanted to have that. But the other one is that every restorative conversation calls us to have community commitments. And these commitments, as a facilitator, often we hold each other accountable for ensuring that that happens. And so the commitments are to be curious, open, and respectful, to challenge our assumptions, speak your truth in ways that respect other people's truths. So the speaking from the I is really, really, really important. That we honor your story and that we sit back and really allow you to share your story and your truth. When the going gets rough, turn to wonder. We turn to assumptions really fast. And so what we're asking you to do is that, to be curious, to live in the curiosity. One that is really, really important, and sometimes we forget, is that each one of us has our own inner teacher. And so we're asking you to attend to your own inner teacher, particularly if if you're wondering, if you're curious, if you're wondering. And then the last but not least is know that it's possible. Know that it's possible to leave this space with whatever it was that you needed when you arrived. And that the seeds planted here tonight will keep and will continue to grow in the days ahead. So really be open to that. And so what I will do is hold space for this container to ensure that we do this in a way that create safety for everyone, and that we're a room of strangers, that there's trust built here. And that we could, our panelists, who you get to meet in a few moments, will speak the truth and you will hold them with the highest of regards. And so with this community commitments, what we usually do in circle, we go around and we'll ask anyone, if you have a question, whether or not you agree, if you have something to add. But because we don't have the time, what I'm gonna ask is that you give me a thumbs up that you are committed to this. And if you forget, because we do, I will gently and lovingly remind you and hold you accountable to these commitments. And so if I could see a thumbs up, thank you very, very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Blanca. Give it up. Give us a thumbs up. Yeah, so what we're going to do, since we only have one mic, and I'm not going to just bring all the panelists up at the same time, we're going to treat this like, we're going to intro each. So I'm just going to ask, who am I going to ask first? Let me see, who should I ask first? Bea, why don't you come up and introduce yourself? Sit right next to me.
She run first.
Yes. All right, so I don't like introducing my guests.
Oh, okay.
I like my guests to introduce themselves. So
Okay, I love that.
say who you are and what you do and why you're here.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Hi everyone, it's great to be in community with you all. Thank you so much for organizing this and for bringing me on board. I really appreciate it. My name is Bea Jimenez. I use the she series pronouns, and I'd like to start by just saying that I'm Dominican and Haitian. I'm very proud of my culture. I am an anti-racist educator and facilitator, and I'm excited to be here tonight to share a little bit more about my story and why I'm so proud of my heritage.
Thank you for being here. Little welcome. Thank you. Okay. Abel. I was gonna say Abel, but you go by Abel. All right, good. Why not? You're there, and then Abel will be here, but you introduce yourself. And they both work.
Everyone, it's great to be here. My name is Abel Orman, if you speak Spanish or want to say Abel. I'm a proud Dorchester native, originally from here in Boston, grew up also in Hawaii and Indianapolis. I founded an organization called The Arc of Change, which teaches storytelling, community organizing, and liberatory practices to progressive leaders. And I also am here in particular because I believe that true change comes when we empower people who are directly impacted by the challenges that we seek to change. And conversations like this help make that happen.
Wow. Two great panelists, and there's a third great panelist. Yelena, you want to come up and introduce yourself? And I'll pass the mic here. Say who you are.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to say I'm feeling very grateful to be here today. Thank you so much for creating this amazing event, and I'm super happy to be, with my Latinos. It's always fun. But yes, my name is Yelena. For those who have social media, you can follow me Yelena Music. I am a Latin soul artist. I am here from Boston. I also grew up in Florida, and I am Cuban and Dominican. As well as I was nominated and won Latin Artist of the Year award, nominated by Boston Music Awards last year. And I also am nominated this year again. So yeah. Yes, no, thank you. But I am mostly here also, mostly for Soraya, but also because with everything that I'm working on right now, besides my music career, my biggest goal is to utilize my platform to help others. So I would love in the future to create my own nonprofit organization to help survivors of domestic violence, as well as human trafficking. And as well as, I really just love to learn from others and to inspire others, because I believe that we come on this world to, how do I say this, to inspire and to create an impact. So yeah.
Great. So this is a communal experience because we are literally sharing a mic. So, but I don't think any of you will lack volume if you're not, if you want to jump in, just jump right in while someone has a mic, because what I'd like to do for the next probably like 20, 25 minutes before I turn it back over to Blanca to sort of put it to circle, what's the circle of the conversation? because then we'll turn it over to the last couple of questions about accountability. But let's get there, right? Because we gotta get there with, first of all, I'm really impressed. 3 amazing guests from Boston, the Boston area. You know, for me, it's kind of a big deal. I don't think I've ever talked about Latinidad in the 02186 in Milton. It's the first time. I'm telling you. All right, before I'm gonna turn it over to y'all, I just want to give a little bit of context. I just got this late data about Latinos in the Commonwealth, as they say. So do you know that we're the 11th state with the most eligible Latino voters in the country? 465,000 Latinos are eligible to vote in the state of Massachusetts. I'll guarantee every one of you that probably about 90% of that 465 is completely invisible in the conversation, right? A couple other things. The median income of Latinos in Massachusetts is $51,700. That's less than the national average of Latinos in the United States of $57,600. Okay? That one was whoa. 22% of all Latinos in Massachusetts live in poverty. And 27% of Latinos in this state do not have a high school degree. I've always made the argument that Latinos are a forgotten community, an invisibilized community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we should have been having these conversations 30 years ago. But we're having them tonight. So with that context, because I really wanted to give this, like, we're in Milton, we're like, you know, a mile away from Boston. I've never had this conversation here. I've had it in Cambridge and Brookline, but not here. So this is the first question I want to ask each one of you. Now, let's just do this, like kindergarten here. How does your story relate to this conversation, and what made you interested in being a part of this? Because you all came in and said, I'm here, right? So why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for grounding us in those facts. I think, you know, hearing it laid out like that, I think anecdotally we probably all kind of understood and known that, but I love hearing it because it's another confirmation that we are here, that we have been here, and that we continue to be here, and we will, you know, we're adding a lot to this city and to this community and to Massachusetts as a whole. So what brings me to this, I would say, is definitely my own immigrant story. I immigrated with my family when I was 4 years old from the Dominican Republic, and just like any other immigrant, we came seeking opportunity, right? My mother was a nurse, actually, in Dominican Republic, but her status was quickly diminished when she arrived here to clean homes and be in service work. And she did that so that my brother and I today can both be the people that we are today, you know? And so I always think of her sacrifice and her story when I'm thinking about, you know, the impact that I'm trying to create in the communities that I'm a part of.
Thank you so much. Abel.
My grandparents came from the Dominican Republic to the United States for access to education for their kids. And my mom was part of the busing initiatives in the 70s from Dorchester to West Roxbury. And in pursuit of that dream that her parents gave her, she experienced getting rocks thrown at her on the way into school, and taught me that education is worth fighting for. And as a kid, I moved from Hawaii to Indianapolis with my mom, and the values that I was taught as a kid, education, family, faith, being part of something bigger than yourself, came alive when, for a short time, new place, new school, mom had a temp job but had to get a medical procedure, was temporarily let go from her job, and so we were homeless for a little while. And that reality of family, of community, of what it actually means to turn toward each other in moments of challenge, I saw when I was really young. We used to bring folks who needed a place to stay to live with us. But for the first time, I was on the receiving end of that and saw that we met a family of strangers, Dominican and Puerto Rican family, like the Brady Bunch. Each had 4 kids in the marriage, and they invited us to live with them. And
Was there a theme song?
there might have been. There's a lot of Berlin, a lot of salsa. But it was interesting because in that moment of challenge, I was 11 years old, we had to choose them and they had to choose us. And too often, I feel it's possible to be going through something and believe that you're alone in that struggle, whether it be food insecurity, homelessness, violence, whatever it is in our community. And so a lot of my journey growing up has been about confronting that and realizing it wasn't just my mom and I going through that, a lot of other families were too. and that we're all kind of fighting for our own path, but we're not in it alone. And so what does it look like to actually cultivate capacity to fight that fight together? And to recognize that we're not alone, and to organize to do that. And so that's been a lot of what calls me to this work.
I love that story.
Yeah, at the heart of that is
We're gonna
these conversations.
circle back to that, but I want to make sure that. So you want to go by Yelena or Yelena? Okay, I just want to make sure because I heard the Boston pronunciation. I just want. What tell me? Why are you here? Tell us your story.
My dad.
I'll be like, okay. Don't mean that. No, I'm just kidding. Or Selena, right?
Oh, you're funny. I like her. Thank you. Well, like I said, I am Cuban Dominican. I was born in Boston and I grew up in Florida. I lived in Orlando for a year and lived in Cape Coral for about 7 to 8 years. So I would say I started to experience a little bit of racism when I moved to Florida. The first time that I was told, quote unquote, go back to your own country was when I was probably like in the 3rd grade. So when that happened, I remember talking to my dad about it, and I remember him specifically sitting me down and telling me like, going back to what country? This is your country, but you also need to recognize where both of your parents came from. And he also, told me too that a lot of people, when it comes to people who live in America, a lot of people tend to forget who are the original Americans, which are the indigenous people, which are the Native Americans, And that's something that I remember to this day because of my dad, because that is the truth, right? So growing up and keeping that in mind, I really I felt like, yes, there were times where I always had to kind of fight or try to do better because of the fact that I was Latina. And also recognizing my privilege. Because yes, I am Latina, but I'm also light-skinned, right? And so as Latinos, or wherever you come from, you always have to recognize the privilege that you have, whether you're light-skinned or whether you're dark-skinned. I know when people look at me, I know they probably wondered, oh, she may be Puerto Rican, she may be Dominican, she may be black and white, whatever it may be, ambiguous. So I also, growing up, I had to recognize the privilege that I have, but I also had to recognize how much I had to fight, and also recognize the privilege that I had being a citizen. Because of my dad's situation, both of my parents came to America, right, to better their lives, right? And due to the situation that my dad has, immigration-wise, from his perspective, I had to learn the importance of how it really feels to have freedom in this country, right? Because this country speaks on so much about independence and freedom, but the reality is some of us really don't have freedom in this country compared to other countries, right? And also we have to recognize the privileges that we have being in this country compared to other people in other countries that don't have the same privilege as us, right? So that being said, I feel like for me, a lot of the things that I had to learn was recognizing the privileges that I have growing up, privileges that I have, as a Latina, also the privileges I don't have in other aspects, especially being a woman, right? Because me as a Latin artist, the biggest thing that I've been trying to figure out since I started my music career was here in Boston, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, is the fact that a lot of people don't recognize a lot of Latin artists, Latin creatives, right? And that's why the award that I got from Boston Music Awards was so important.
Yeah.
The reason why they brought back Latin Artist of the Year was because of Bad Bunny. That was honestly the reality. Artists like Bad Bunny, who have been doing, doing what they have to do and, creating an impact in the industry, is that did a lot for us as Latinos, but also people in the music industry, because it is making everyone in the world notice us. So people like the Boston Music Awards, the last time they awarded someone for Latin Artist of the Year was back in the 90s, right? So since then, I've been trying to do my due diligence to really create awareness amongst our people, but also other people that are no awareness. Like I mentioned, people who are indigenous, and as well as other people that don't feel like others are talking about them or their culture and, their identity. So yeah.
So that was great. As a follow-up, because you kind of spoke into my second question, so if you want to pass the mic to Lynn. Blanca and I talked for a second. They're all good, Karen. So talking about this experience or identity, Abel, if you want to come in on that question about why you talk about identity right there, about your parents, also Orlando, O-Town. I have family in Orlando. My wife can attest to that. So there is a difference, right? There's a difference between that type of experience, and you mentioned Hawaii and Indianapolis, and then here we are in Boston, right? In the Boston area, right? So talking about your experiences or identities that are central to who you are, kind of what you were saying, and kudos. Like I said, I didn't even know the Boston Music Awards stopped doing that, right? But good for you that you're like, no, you're back. That's important. But what do you bring into this? Like, just to follow up on what you're going to say. Yeah.
As a kid, I learned a lot about what being Dominican is from my grandmother, from my abuela on my dad's side, and my mom. Abuela used to wake me up early, give me café con leche in the morning, pan con queso. We used to sit down and talk, right? So being Dominican came in part through the portal of food. When I was a little kid, on Saturday, Mom used to turn the TV off, throw a pillow on my chest, put on some bachata, and make me dance. I hated it. I was like, I just want to watch cartoons. I want to watch Batman. But she had me out here dancing, and I really didn't like it at like 8. But by the time I was 16, I was grateful. So dance became another portal onto my culture. And when I was in Hawaii, no one I knew spoke Spanish. So by the time I came to visit Abuela in the summer, I started losing my access to communicate with one of the people I love most in the world. And so at the same time, music also became a way to reclaim relationship, because I started listening to Yoscar Sarante and Mark Anthony and Vico C, and developed a love for not just hip hop in English, but also in Spanish, and was like learning that the more that I listened to music that came from folks like me, I then started acquiring the language again, which as a sort of beautiful benefit, I then, when I went to visit grandma again, could talk with her. And so these ways of like translating what it means to be part of a grander culture in a context that isn't just Dominican, right? Like grandma could get by without speaking a lot of English because we're in Dorchester, but outside of that, I was in a lot of spaces that didn't have the sort of culturally affirming sort of a way of relating to each other. And so I felt I had to be really intentional about that, but I'm also grateful to be able to carry that into the spaces that I go to, because, and I'll just end with this, the values of something like unshakable optimism, that no matter what's happening to us, we'll get through it. Wild perseverance, right? This idea that it doesn't matter how hard things are, we're never giving up. Things like that are also things that were translated to me through watching them as role models for me. So it's part
That
of
was,
the
I'm sorry, that was really nice. All right, before you tell your story, I just want to, Haitian Dominican.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for anyone that follows the community, right? You talk about healing, right? Which is why you claim it, which is what Blanca says, like harm, and we're gonna get in. That's why Blanca and I are not gonna get into this. I want to hear your stories first.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm sure you have a story,
Yes, I do.
but in the communities that people are trying to find out more about our communities, and our experience, let's just be honest, is a little bit more East Coast, Northeast.
Absolutely.
Like,
It's
we
so
do not
different.
represent, like, everyone's like, we are not a monolith. You go down to Texas and some of these questions would be answered very differently. But tell me your story about that. Like Haitian, like if you say Haitian, wow, I love
I
it.
do. I just have to say I love that idea of wild optimism.
Yeah.
I'm gonna definitely be thinking about that. I think for me, so yes, definitely there's a story. The story is that I was 19 and for the first time got to travel alone to my abuela's house in Dominican Republic. And as abuelas do, she sat me down and, gave me a little bit of the family history. And part of that history was that the man that I had kind of been claiming as my grandfather, who was like very active in my family, was not necessarily my grandfather. And she told me, in the cutest way that only she could do it, it was something de, eso era cosa de mujeres joven, like basically being embarrassed that she had a little bit of an affair.
Yeah, it's like young women. This is what young women, feeling of young women, right?
And I was like, Grandma, tell me more, And so it was like pretty controversial actually for her to tell me.
Yeah.
My mom was pissed.
This
So I was like 19, and so my aunt who, you know, is kind of like the rebel in the family, the one I was like looked up to. So I ended up telling my aunt that she had shared this kind of like bombastic news with me, and my aunt is like, yeah, and he like lives up the street. Do you want to go meet him? And I was like, are you serious? And so I literally met my grandfather this way, and my aunt explored the story even further and was like, not only is he your grandfather, he's also Haitian. And that story is extremely important for many, many reasons, but what I'll share in brevity for tonight is that my grandfather did not have the privilege of being able to say that he was Haitian. He arrived to the Dominican Republic at a time where, unfortunately, still to this day, it was very dangerous for him to say that he was Haitian. He essentially would have just been deported in the same way that it's often happening in our country. And so it is a proud moment for me to be able to stand here with my colleagues and be able to say that I am Dominican and Haitian. And I honor my grandfather's legacy by claiming that part of my identity.
Wow, all right.
Well, let's give it up for a second. That was, thank you for sharing that. All right, we're gonna jump into the next part of this program. I want you to start because going back to how you started sort of the conversation of harm and systems, and you know, I'm gonna just toss it. I saw the question, and I want to challenge the assimilation question, and I want to frame it a little bit differently, but I want each and every one of you to talk about it. The word assimilation, right, is so loaded in our community. We have a history of, there's plenty of people in our community who embrace it. There's plenty of people in our community who reject it. There's plenty of people who challenge it. There's plenty of people who feel like it's imposed on us, right? To say like, you must, you know, what is assimilation in 21st century United States society, right? As we become, I think we're gonna be 69 million in the country. The second largest voting cohort in the United States, right? So we're no longer, you know. I think Bad Bunny, speaking of Bad Bunny, if you don't watch Saturday Night Live, then, you know, we are the mainstream culture now. After, you know, if you saw it on Saturday, the fact that there was a Spanish skit with English subtitles was so subversive. Little fun story about it. One of the extras is a friend of mine, and we actually do a project together. And he's the one that holds the turkey. So anyway, that's all I'm gonna say. You just gotta watch it. So Michael, why don't you start? Because that's sort of this chart, because I come from the space that our community has not fully rejected assimilation, because I can go through each community, whether it's Puerto Rican community or the Cuban community or Mexican, you know, you take the roots of like a LULAC, that, you know, back in the time an organization, civil rights organization said you have to be fully American, you have to speak English. A lot of, like, not, you know, there was plenty of my friends in the Southwest, their parents, grandparents, who were literally beaten in public schools in the 20th century for speaking Spanish. So I want to take this mic, I'm going to take it over, and then this is going to go all the way back to me. And this is the juicy part of the courageous conversation today. So, Blanca, why don't you get us started on this one?
And if y'all want to say yes, no, or jump in, go.
So if you all remember, one of the community commitments is to speak from the I, right? To speak from my truth. And so this is very much connected to my truth, and there's a lot of pain associated with this. So if I choke up, it's, you know, part of that is because of the pain that is often associated, particularly for Puerto Ricans. And so you would know, out of the 20 plus Latin American countries, you would know Puerto Rican, because we will wear a flag from head to toe. There are flags everywhere. And that is so much connected to, in the 40s, when we weren't allowed, we were being incarcerated for 10 years for showing the Puerto Rican flag. And so and another thing that's really interesting is for Puerto Ricans, we are U.S. citizens and automatic U.S. citizens. We're the only colony in the Western Hemisphere. So part of that history it's attached to pain and it's attached to resistance, right? And so for me and my family, has been about resisting that. You know, it's resisting this idea of assimilation and holding ourselves in the pride. And we do that through speaking it up. We do that by speaking loudly when we need to. It is, I identify as a Boricua, and that's, for me, when it comes to identity, is that, I said tip of the iceberg, and then I'm the mother, and then I'm the daughter, and and so for me, part of reclaiming my healing is speaking that truth. And part of that truth is the resistance around what it means to assimilate. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that I have benefited from, right, from being a citizen from birth, but there's also a lot of things that have been taken from me because of that, right? And so part of that for me is speaking the truth around the pain so that I could heal and then be able to talk about it in ways that that are honest,
Right.
and that invites us to talk about then how do we then move from this collectively, right? Not just Puerto Ricans, but how do we do this collectively? Because there's so much of our stories that interconnect,
Yeah.
and there's so much of our stories that resonate with each other.
Especially
Part
the
of that.
Caribbean, like, when we look at the Caribbean community, let's be honest, right? It's a history of colonialism, colorism, racism, who has the power, imperial, like, it's all the isms, all the bad isms, right? And that's, and this assimilation
Right.
is
And it's connected to resistance, right? And I'm purposely also not using resiliency, because that's I have another, not only do I have an issue with that word, but I think truly it's about resisting, right? And resisting that's why we are connected to the foods, the language, the abuelita stories, and we all have those.
right. So as we pass the mic, I'm gonna give you another data point about this, which Pew Research, everyone knows Pew Research. When you talk about assimilation, when you talk about language and culture, third or fourth or fifth generation Latinos, Latinas, however we want to identify, feel like they've said shame when they don't know how to speak Spanish, and they actually speak English. They actually are bringing sort of this, I like to say sort of this new America that we're just like the fact that Bad Bunny hosted Saturday Night Live. I'm a big Saturday Night Live fan, right? I hate it, Chico Escuela, which was Garrett Morris, he was this like baseball player who spoke with an accent. He was like, baseball didn't make it very good to me, right? Remember that in the 70s days? And that was seen as funny. I hated it, right? I hated it. So there's something about what I totally, like, as Puerto Rican, totally get it, but at the same time, the data and the reality is saying that our community is starting to evolve and become a fabric of this country, but we're still being told, like you said, go back to your country, right? You're a third grader. Right? So when I say assimilation, when you hear your parents in the room, we want a better life, the American way, what goes through your mind?
I mean, for me, here's the thing, and like it goes back to what I learned growing up, and especially the things that my dad said, right?
Yeah.
My dad's Cuban. So, as you know, like, if you know about the Cuban history, it's very, how do I say it? It's very rough, but it's also, it's sad, it's rough, and, there's a lot to it. And so, being Cuban, Dominican, American, when it comes to assimilation, I think the biggest thing for me is that I never really struggled with being proud of where it came from.
Right.
But I think when I was younger, yes, there were times where I kind of questioned, or wondered if I had to dress a certain way, if I had to look a certain way, especially like growing up. I have my hair straightened right now, but, I have naturally curly hair. Growing up, I wasn't proud of my curly hair. I wasn't proud of the fact that I was a heavyset girl, And the heavyset has probably nothing to do with my culture, but at the same time it does. Why? Because a lot of the girls that I was around, whether, they were white or not white, a lot of them, I felt like I couldn't relate to them because of the culture, especially the people I was looking up to in the media.
Right.
I felt like I never could see someone like me in the media, Besides when my dad introduced me to Selena, but and you know, and
But she's
other
Mexican, she's not
like
Cuban.
right,
Or
but
related, but at least,
Right.
at least you identify with Selena,
Exactly.
right?
exactly. She got curves.
Who was
and-
J-Lo? I mean, you saw J-Lo first, but you saw
For sure.
So she was Puerto Rican. No,
Right. But no, it's okay. Oh, you're funny. Sorry. But you know, but seeing like people like Selena, she's a huge example of assimilation, right? The things that her family struggled with. You know, her father, he was, I think he is Mexican. His family came from Mexico, and he, you know, he had to assimilate a lot, right?
You know the famous line in the movie?
The-
Like, the problem with being a Mexican American, and I feel it, but it's like,
and
you
that's what I was
gotta
gonna say.
prove that you're Mexican to the Mexicans
And
and Americans
It's
to the
the
Americans.
Americans.
And that's your entire
Exactly,
life, right?
right.
You feel that?
And that's how I felt, and that's what I was gonna say. That's how I felt growing up, especially me being half Dominican. That's honestly how I felt when I mostly went to Dominican Republic
Yeah.
compared to Cuba. No offense, Mom. But you know, when I went to Dominican Republic, I felt like I always had to prove how Dominican I was.
Yeah.
You know, making sure I spoke Spanish perfectly, and my cousins low key making fun of me behind my back. And when it came to Cuba, I mean, when I went to Cuba, people recognized that I wasn't fully Cuban, and there were people that were, you know, actually like pull their middle finger up because of the situation between Cuba and America. You understand? So there were sometimes inner struggles I dealt with as a child because, you know, especially there's so much that I didn't know back then, and I was a child.
You were a child.
Yeah, exactly. And I was a very curious and observant child, just like I still am now as a young adult. But those things always stuck to me, and at the end of the day, it also just made me realize, okay, like no matter what, I always have to be proud of where I come from. I need to be aware when I'm trying to be a certain way or trying to hide my true self or my culture, you know? So those are the biggest things I felt like I always thought of when it comes to assimilation, because at the end of the day, one day when I have my own kids, I want them to be proud of who they are, who their mom is, and who, I don't know who my future husband is gonna be. If he's Latino or if he's not, I want them to know where they're from, you know? Because at the end of the day, it's like, I need to be proud. Why? Because of my parents, because of my grandparents, you know, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, hopefully that answers.
All right, Emily, I'm so glad that the organizers picked a non-controversial topic. Assimilation to me is like, but when I say the word assimilation after what our colleagues just said, I'm like fired up. Like, what's on your mind?
Two things come up for me. One is like, why the imperative to assimilate in the first place? Like, why is it such a present challenge for us as a young generation to even ask this question? And the second is about like, how does it show up? So on the first point for me, I look at my family, and my grandparents and great-grandparents came up in a culture where when the elders got older, they lived with the kids. And when the kids were getting older, until they married, they generally lived with the family. It was kind of like the family was like a contained unit in a sense that supported one another. I look at my life in America and it feels different. It feels like branches of the family are kind of off independently in their own space, having to figure things out. And by the time that you're in the generation that I'm in, you know, the average young person has at least 14 jobs by the time that they retire, which means that you're not having the one job, working it for 30 years and getting a Rolex. You have to figure out how to make things work, how to save for retirement, how to, you know, and then at least from my experience, I always got my mom, my grandparents in the back of my mind about how can I provide for my family in a way that honors the legacy and tradition that I come from, while then facing the sort of survival needs that we all face living in a country like this. And so I wonder about that because to the second point, where does it come up? The word assimilation to me is very foggy in the abstract. I have no idea what that means in the abstract. But I do know what it means when it comes to my experience of being in school and getting access to the class I wanted to or not, or you know, being treated differently from other students, or when it comes to access to something like college, or when it comes to driving around in a neighborhood and getting pulled over for no reason, a lot. These kinds of things are direct confrontations with the kind of structures through which I experience the fact that I'm different in a way that I can't hide even if I chose to. So the way that I respond to that is by recognizing it and by standing firm in what I believe and who I am and where I'm from, and in learning to value the rich assets that my culture and identity brings to a space, even if it hasn't been recognized by the space that I'm in.
Boom. That one hit. That was good. All right.
Really hard to follow up.
No, that's something you can follow up.
But
Not
I
just saying.
think, I think it's that last part.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned the statistic that many folks feel shame
Yeah.
around having
Well,
lost access to their language.
have you seen the videos? Like there was this.
Yeah.
Did you see the one? I don't know if y'all saw it this summer. There's a little
Yeah.
like Mexican American boy, and the U.S. I think Mexico was playing in the Gold Cup, and the Mexican sort of like sports writer, whatever, sort of comes up. It's like, what do you think about? He says in Spanish, and the poor kid's like, I don't know how to speak Spanish.
Yeah.
Right? And he was completely shamed all over Mexico.
Yeah.
Little 8-year-old kid. So anyway, I was just giving
No,
an
I
example.
agree.
Yes.
I think I'll be honest and share because we're having a courageous conversation. I think I've made that judgment before.
Yeah.
I think I absolutely have made that judgment when I've met other Latinas like in the workforce, and I try to speak to them in Spanish, and I don't get the same kind of like, I'm like, oh, she's maybe one of those, And so I think in ignorance, and trying to like disconnect from the other, I've made that judgment. However, what I do know is that it's a very loaded conversation for our community. And I also want to say that if you are a Latino person who does not speak Spanish, I would encourage you to speak Spanish, not because you need it to prove who you are, but because it's an asset that they tried to steal from us, right? And there's a reason for it, right? I think I travel often now, and because I speak Spanish, I can relate very well to different cultures because of that bilingual status that I have. And so I would just welcome the curiosity and wonder of learning that native language, whatever it might be, because it might not just be Spanish. We're also, just like we say that Latinos are Black, we're also indigenous. And so there might be something within your family lineage that you might want to learn from and pick up from. So that's what I would share. But sharing in honesty here that I think I've made that judgment myself for others, and also acknowledging how difficult and loaded it has been for us to just feel connected to this new home that we're calling home, right? And so, yes, many people were forced to lose that language in order to feel more connected to this new home.
Yeah.
Assimilation has a violent history.
Yes,
That if you look at American history, and before I turn it over to Blanca, because we are going to end with hope and accountability, but I think a couple of things that people don't know, lynchings of Mexicans at the turn of around the turn of the 20th century. That happened. It's pretty bad. As Puerto Rican, look at Puerto Rican history and the struggle as a colony. Plenty of people died. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, but also acknowledge what you all have brought up already, in a very smart as hell way. Because I'm sitting up, the three of you, and I'm like, wow. That we still have a lot of things that we have to deal with within our own community, but we're aware of it. You know what I mean? And that's the difference. And I feel like in this day and age now, with this community that still hasn't reached its full potential power, I tell people all the time, like, can you give us time to figure it out? Like we know, can we give us time to figure it out? Because we're here, right? We're still invisible in Metro Boston. There's bigger battles to go after, but I have a feeling that the three of you will be doing great things in the greater Boston area, and I can't wait to. I'm leading to the hope and the accountability. See what I did here? So we're gonna end with a lot of hope, and I'm gonna turn it over to Blanca because she has a couple of questions to kind of sort of frame the conversation and bring it together, and then we're going to take questions from the participants or from the Zoom attendees. So take it away, Blanca.
Gracias. One of the things that comes through really, really clearly is this idea of belonging. I think no matter who you are, where you come from, you just want to belong, right? You just want to be a part of something or someone or a group. So I'm big on circles, but I'm also really big on community. Nothing happens without community, and healing is a huge part of that. One of the things that came through for me is the saying that often we're confronted with, ni de aquí ni de allá. And that's that you neither belong here nor there, right? And that is really, common for those that are either first generation or came here very, very young and still have this connection to our homeland. And I always say, I put my head down. I live in Dedham, so I live back up on the street. I put my head down in Dedham at night, but my heart and soul has been in Puerto Rico, and I've been here for 40 plus years, right? So this yearning and this, wanting to belong, I think is really rooted in everything that you said, and that just came for me so clearly. And it's also a lot of loss that has happened in the community, right? And I think part of that is the recognition that there has been, there needs to be some dismantling of some of the structures that have not only been complicit but have perpetuated some of the harm. Whether that has lived within us or whether that has lived with a bigger community. We bought the school system, and that's one that a lot of my pain comes through immediately. It's connected to my identity. But we can't talk about moving forward without this idea of accountability. And so for everyone, what would be helpful in terms of accountability if we see the harm, right? If we hear the harm, what do you suggest or what have you recommend when it comes to accountability? What comes up to you around that?
Why don't we start with Abel, so we're not always good. So why don't you start, because you haven't started.
So this is about the art, and
Yeah.
like how do we restore, right? And how do we hold each other accountable around this?
The word, when I hear the word accountability, to me, it implies relationship. So for me, it's really hard to have a conversation about accountability without recognizing that we're holding ourselves accountable in relationship to our own values, to ourselves, in relationship to the commitments, the agreements, or the commitments, as you said earlier, that we make with other people, and that's where accountability thrives. And it's hard to be in relationship if we don't belong to each other in some way. So the belonging thing is really alive. For me, in my work, I do leadership trainings, and sometimes we're in workshops with 20, 30, 50, 100 people in a room, and inevitably, when you bring a lot of people together who are from different backgrounds, some conflict can emerge. Someone can at some point feel uncomfortable or like harm has been done for some reason. And so, more often than I'd like to see, a similar story unfolds. Someone feels hurt, and maybe they raise it or name it somehow, and then someone next to them might step up as an ally, just kind of advocating or speaking on their behalf. And then whoever's holding space in the room often is trying to figure out how to respond, and then half of the room goes silent, if not more. There's maybe one or two folks advocating, and the person who's harmed often becomes silent. And so the question of accountability without the capacity to turn toward each other in a moment of conflict becomes really difficult. And it's very hard. I'm not saying it's easy. But there's this research by this guy named John Gottman and his wife that study marriages. And they say that one of the biggest predictors of a lasting marriage is the capacity to turn toward each other as opposed to away from each other in a moment of conflict. I think that that's one of the core things that are missing in the way that we are in relationship or not to each other in this community, generally speaking. I think when we're harmed, I think from my perspective, we have a tendency to turn away from the people that we're with, because it almost might feel like it doesn't matter to resolve it with them, right? Like it's like we're on our own anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But it does matter. And it's only a matter of time until we realize that. And I love the last agreement that you put on the board, that it's possible, because to me, that is the essence of hope. A sense of possibility, that it's not a rule or it's not written that David will be Goliath, but it's possible. And that sense of possibility is all you need for hope. So I do have hope that we'll find a way to turn toward each other in these moments of conflict.
All right, who wants to jump in? Here.
Yeah, I actually want to share that also. What I've heard is that when you witness harm, you are also harmed. And so there is, there's like the dual harm that often also goes unnoticed, right? And so if I experience an act of racism, even if it's not towards me, I am harmed because I'm experiencing it for that other person. And so that is something that we often forget about and often don't talk about. And so in thinking about accountability, I invite us to witness, right? I think 2020 showed us what it meant to witness pain together, right? And I think as we're 3 years removed from that incident, I think many of us are still witnessing, right? And we're doing it maybe not in the same silos as before. I think, regardless of the narrative, I do think some important work has started to take fold because of the pandemic, because we were forced to witness.
Even though it doesn't feel like
Yeah.
what we experienced in 2020 is in the front of headlines. To me, speaking from a journalist,
Yeah.
like, it moved the needle to get to the next, to keep pushing.
Absolutely.
Because it is something that is,
Absolutely.
especially when you have years and years of being left behind,
Yeah.
both forced and unforced, so. it's a
Yeah,
great
and
one.
so I guess for me, accountability is forcing us to witness.
Yeah.
I think because of the headlines, because of the 24-hour news cycle, because let's just be honest, because of the toughness that it takes to take and see the news, I think many of us do turn off. And we don't turn off just our screen, we turn off our hearts. And I think if we allow ourselves to witness what is happening, I think many more of us will be willing to be that advocate in the room, to be that ally in the room, to allow a new path to kind of start to emerge.
All right. Award-winning singer. Let's go.
I can, thank you. I mean, I would say for me, when I think about accountability, it's pretty much going off what you said about us Latinos. We have to acknowledge when there's hurt, when there's pain, where there's struggle amongst every single group of Latinos, not just only where you come from, right? So just because you're Dominican, you see what the Puerto Ricans are struggling with, you're like, I'm not from there, so that's not my problem. No, like.
That's so true. That was true. That's a true statement.
Yeah, because I hear it all the time from different demographics. Like I hear what, someone from Guatemala may say about someone from El Salvador, or, like if we may speak Spanish a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, we all come from Latin America. So why isn't it that we're not united? Why are we not keeping each other accountable for what may be going on in each of our countries and not trying to help each other the way that we should, right? It's the same with my parents. My dad's Cuban, my mom's Dominican. Sometimes they'd be like, well, in Dominican Republic, we do this. And then it's like, well, in Cuba, we do this. It's like, okay, hello. Both of y'all have bad presidents, okay? Let's start there. They were both bad. They were the, excuse me, God, but they were the devil. Let's start there. So it's just like, at the end of the day, like, that's what I think of when I think of accountability is like, really taking into account of what each of us are struggling in and what is going on in the world.
Yeah.
Especially when we want to talk about immigration, the immigration issues, the Mexican border, like, as Latinos in our households, we should be having those conversations, as well as talking about mental health, right? We should be having conversations and things we struggle as Latinos in keeping each other accountable, keeping us accountable from the things that we may be suffering in our house, or whether it's domestic violence or anything related mental health wise, and the things that all as a collective, as all of us struggle, right? As Latinos, and we should come together, That's my biggest thing. I feel like as a Latinx community, we don't really some of us don't really speak on and don't recognize Because at the end of the day, like I said, I'm Cuban Dominican, you're Puerto Rican, you know, someone in here may be from El Salvador. Why can we not be united and not speak on what we may be struggling with,
Preach.
you know?
I'm with
So let's just keep that in
It's
mind.
complicated. So you wanna go with the.
I just want to add something around accountability, because usually that word is connected to a grievance, and it's usually connected with separating people from community, right? Like the pointing of the finger. And so one of the things that I want to say with accountability, that the challenge when it comes to a restorative conversation is to sit across from the person that has potentially harmed you and see their humanity. Okay? So that way we could create space for repair. Doesn't make it right, but it invites us to not shame,
Right.
but to be lean in and the curiosity around, let me hear where you're coming from, so now we can move forward, right? And that you're giving me the information that I need, you know, and some of it may be no information at all, but that doesn't make my healing any less important, right? So accountability is not about separating, because that's what we're used to, right? When somebody does harm, we incarcerate them. When it's in school, you suspend them. You evict them if they're not paying their rent, right? But what it's not happening is that we're not really thinking about then what are the structures that are in place that are impeding us from, you know, being able to do this in ways that are really, really raw and real. And I could sit across from someone who has harmed me and be curious about it, right? It takes work, right? But we cannot have these complex conversations if we can't sit across from each other without rawness, right?
Yeah.
And so part of the accountability piece is that it's not the point of it's not the blaming, because we do that enough, right? You know, you don't have to be Latino to do that. I think we do this as human beings, right? We separate ourselves from the people who have harmed us. And so what I'm asking, which again is not comfortable, is can we lean in and really be curious about what does that mean? And so with that, only way around doing that is what I call radical hope. And that radical hope is connected to radical healing. And that is recognizing that in spite of the BS that is happening in the world, we are resisting the harm to be able to heal. So creating that path. And that happens with, you know, community action. And this is community action at its finest, right? When telling stories in such a beautiful way around that ancestral, like this is what
No,
we
this
did,
is
right?
At first,
This is
before
it.
we close, the last question to the audience, like, just a big round, because the stories that have been shared. We started at 7:30, and I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
and all that.
And the stories, right?
Yeah.
And sharing our truth, that's where the healing happens, and it happens organically. And so with that said, you know, we talked about hope, you know, the umbrella being hope. And so there's, you know, you could either ask whether, one or two questions. What parts of this conversation, right, that's giving you hope, or where are you finding hope and agency in your own life?
So now we're going this way, so then Mike ends, and then we can go into, you see how we plan this out? All right.
Con broche de oro.
I would say for me, I mean, I feel like I've always had hope. You know, I always looked at life like from an optimistic lens, you know, because the way I look at it is like life is what you make of it. Yes, I do recognize that there is hurt and pain in the world and that life sometimes can be very tough, but I also do recognize that life can also be beautiful. And so with everything that we touched upon today, I have hope that, you know, we will like be accountable of ourselves. We will keep each other's accountable as well too. And we will stand on what we believe in. Because each and every one of us has a power within us. You know, even if there have been things that you've gone through, whether it's trauma or whatever it may be, where you felt like your power was taken away from you. No, your power was never taken away from you. The power is here in your hearts, right? So that's why with everything that is going on in the world and everything that I've been taught, right, I always believe that I have hope. Why? Because of what I have here in my mouth. Whatever I believe, I will say it. You cannot be afraid of what you believe in, right? And that is what hope is speaking your truth, but also standing in your power.
I love that. I think I I more often than not rather have a really good question than a decent answer. Good questions are super generative. They create more. And over the last 10 years, I think that these questions about healing have become more and more evident in the public sort of discourse. And it says to me that a lot of what we're going through is we're facing challenges as revelation. It's kind of like we're going through things and it's shaking things up, it's creating tension. And when we step back, something new has been revealed. And when it's revealed, we have something more to work on and to work with. And so it feels like that's kind of the process that we're going through as a community, as culture, is going through these kinds of moments, because there's a deep relationship between the sources of our struggle and the sources of our strength. You know, the more deep, profound struggle you go through, the more kind of spiritual strength you cultivate. And so what if all of what we're going through right now in our country and in the world is an invitation of sorts to turn to wonder and inquire what kind of strength is being revealed to me now.
Nice. All right. We all been preaching all night. Everyone.
I would say absolutely radical hope. Like when we were talking about this, I also shared the ancestral practices that I was coming back to. So I talked a lot tonight about my abuela, and I recently found out that she was like a circle keeper. And so my friends all call me the bruja, you know, I am the bruja in my friend group. I am definitely kind of calling back in those recipes that my abuela would have. I'm calling in the ceremony and the rituals that held our family together, the prayers, the lighting of the candle, the holding an altar, the talking to my ancestors, and really holding that in reverence and saying, you know, this is also a part of me. These are the practices that kept my people together. Our people were cimarrones, maroons, you know, they escaped slavery in really violent situations, and they did it all so I can be here today. And so I call in those practices, especially in moments where I'm trying to find a deeper purpose within myself. And I think it's what's actually helped me become a better person and really call forward my leadership.
Before, that's all they're getting? No, one big round of applause for that. Thank you so much. So, we're getting questions, or do we turn it, like, are you screening? There's questions from the Zoom, or we probably have about 5-7 minutes before we wrap up. I know you all want.
Any questions?
Any questions? There we go.
I just wanted to ask, I know that there's a lot of sharing history in the colonization and how successful it has been because of the removal and the taking away of our spirituality and connection to our culture and each other and stuff like that. So I just wanted to know in what ways are you or have you have like reclaiming your connection to spirituality?
Oh, that's a great, and Cuba. No, that's a really great question.
Restate it for
Yeah, sure, I will. In terms of colonialism, because our shared experience, right? Don't get me wrong, right? This is a violent shared experience. I mean, there's no other way to put it around. You know, we were quote unquote discovered when we were already here. You know, communities brutalizing indigenous communities, and you know, let's not get into Spanish or Portuguese imperialism or French or you know, there is sort of this taking away of spirituality, right? That mutual connection and sort of what I've seen, you know, my generation has seen your generation even reclaim more of that spirituality to the point that like my Gen X, like we didn't do it, like we were like dancing to Ricky Martin in the 90s. So do you want, like, talk about that? Because I'm curious about it, because it's something that's been stripped away, right? So go ahead, and then anyone else who wants to jump in after.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, we mentioned tonight how language is an asset. And so these spiritual practices are also an asset. And so they saw that we were organizing and we were calling our gods and we were starting to make hell for them. And so it did not benefit those folks from letting us keep those practices, right? And so in the same way, I reclaim them today because it is the same way that I reclaim that power. It's the same way that, as I shared tonight, that I do think that our language is an asset and we should reclaim it. Not because we need it in order to like affirm to some being somewhere that we are who we are, but because it is something that was literally taken from us. And by you reclaiming it now, I'm so excited to share with my future daughter, my future kids, all of these practices that I reclaimed in this generation from my grandmother, right? And so those are the ways that I'm gonna keep those practices in my family, and hopefully she'll share them with her friends and so on and so forth, right? That's how we keep our legacy alive.
Anyone else want to jump in on this? Yeah. That's great.
When I was 13, I mentioned, well, when I was young, my mom and I moved in with that family in Indianapolis. And Nellie, the mom of the family, became my godmother. And she was both Catholic and practiced Santeria. Now, I didn't know what that was, but there were like these altars and all these like beautiful prayers and all these ceremonies. And in the back of my mind, my grandmother was speaking up. My curiosity to learn about Nellie and what she was practicing was strong. But grandma is Catholic. And she'd be like, "Who's smells the devil?" Right? She'd be saying the opposite. And so, you know, I, having been raised Catholic and now in a very new environment where I have this new family, I started to learn to love what Nellie was practicing. And she taught me that it came from Africa and it's part of my culture and my tradition and my heritage. And so the more that I learned, I began to experience, that it put me into greater relationship with my ancestors. It made me feel more aligned. I discovered a new relationship to my own intuition in practicing and praying with Nellie. And so I started asking myself, is this wrong? Is this bad? When I got to college, I was reading the essays and it just made me, it started to make me feel cynical. Because Nellie would tell me, don't talk about what we're doing here because people won't understand. So I began to develop a shame around something that was bringing me so much life and light. And so I'm going to talk about it. I didn't talk about it through middle school, through high school, even through college. And I started reading these articles, and there's one by this gentleman named Tyler who studied Aboriginal traditions. And he made a comment that the totems and all the sort of spiritual practices of these indigenous cultures were, in order to grapple with the uncertainty of man, they were praying to something that they couldn't quite put their finger on, right? That, in other words, that religion was a crutch. Right? And I was like, I don't want to use a crutch. And so these different messages externally I started relating to them in a way that made me want to push apart parts of myself that I really believe in. And so this guy named Robert Keegan does research at Harvard, and he has this whole developmental psychology framework. But part of what he says is that we internally either have a board of directors or a board of advisors. What I'm just describing is me grappling with the board of directors. In other words, I was sitting at the center of the table with all these external forces around me telling me how to feel, and I didn't feel that I had the capacity to choose what to believe for myself. And there was a breaking point for me when, toward the end of my college experience, I decided to write a paper about my experiences with Nellie and learning about that spirituality. And I learned that actually Santeria, most Santeros are also baptized Catholic, because there's not so much of a difference between those cultures, but they've actually been assimilated because of the slave trade and all the rest. And in doing that, it was a step toward reclaiming my own decision about what I wanted to believe in life and taking one step toward turning a board of directors into a board of advisors. People or forces that can consult for me, but I decide. You know, and so I think the way I orient to it is deciding what my experience is of my own practice. Does it make me feel clear or confused? Does it make me feel constricted or expansive? What is it? And we get to decide for ourselves what we want to believe about that practice, I think.
Awesome. Anyone else? Really quick before we take another question?
I'll just say quickly. So, for me, I would say, you know, growing up, I definitely wasn't aware of the fact that I knew that, you know, my parents always taught me about God and stuff and Christianity and Catholicism, but I wasn't aware as I got older, probably in 2020, that there's more than just God. There's, you know, there's like you know, that pretty much that I had spiritual gifts. And these are things that actually I don't really talk to my parents about a lot, because even them, I felt like when my mom, she grew up, you know, like coming from a family that believed, you know, just God and stuff like that, and all the other stuff, like you said, like, nah, those are the devil, like, we don't talk about those things, you know? But I also learned from my dad's side of the family, like my dad, you know, had an aunt who was a santera, you know, and I remember when I went to Cuba, well, back in like 2018, I remember we spoke a little bit about Santeria and like the stuff that she practices, but we didn't speak too much about it, you know, because she just wanted to be respectful, you know, she didn't know like if I was open to it or not. But besides that, you know, when I started to tap into my own spiritual journey back in 2020, I started to realize the importance of spirituality, but also how it related within my own, I guess, like genetics. And then I recently learned that, you know, on my dad's side of the family, there's a lot of spirituality, right? But those are things that, you know, at the end of the day, it comes to if you're open to it or not. But now that, you know, I've grown in my spiritual journey and I've learned so much of how my spirituality really relates to how I grew up, to my ancestors, it definitely makes me feel more aligned, and it definitely makes me feel, in a sense, more powerful, right? Because it really taught me a lot about like, wow, okay, so for my family, a lot of us have spiritual gifts. A lot of us are, you know, powerful, and a lot of us, and these are things that obviously I wasn't taught, but I feel like even if you come from a family where those things are not taught, it's always gonna come back, you know? It's just whether or not you're open to having that conversation, you know? So it's just, you know, and I know both my parents right there are like, okay.
What are you talking about? Never tell me until right now.
But you know, at the end of the day, like I remember when I was younger, my dad doesn't know this, but I remember when I was younger, I would see my dad like cleansing the house and doing little like Cuban practices that he did, that he grew up, right? That my mom may not grow up, because at the end of the day, it's different, you know, different cultures, different backgrounds. And so now that I'm older, now those are things that I've learned, and I'm also practicing, you know, don't really speak too much with other people about, but those are things that I'm like really conscious of now. And I feel very happy, because like kind of what you said, it really makes me feel more aligned to myself, well, to my purpose, but also to my ancestors and what, you know, and I would say, yeah, pretty much like how things were supposed to unfold. So yeah.
All right.
One quick last question, or you wanna? Oh, one more, Karen. Nobody? If not, all right. First of all, this was amazing. I know I've asked for a lot of applause, but let's do one more time. I'm acknowledging this space. I actually have some friends who were very central to making this space a reality in this town. And one of the greatest gifts to this town is this building and this community space. And I love being back at the Public Library with such amazing voices. And let's get back to you, Karen, to outro it out. Thank you. Thank you again. This was a great conversation.
Did we have some parting comments from Abel? Yes.
Oh, that's right, the outro. Yes, Abel's party comments, right?
No.
Yeah, this is right.
Just to talk about what we've got coming up, but I'd love to hear.
Well, I'll keep it brief. I mean, first of all, thank you for the panelists, for the moderators, for the facilitators, for the invitation. I was saying a little earlier that questions can be a gift. And I just want to close by offering us 3 questions. First posed by Rabbi Hillel, first century Rabbi Hillel. When a pupil asked Rabbi Hillel what it meant to lead a life of purpose, he responded not with 3 answers, but with 3 questions. And I encourage you to consider them for yourself. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? It's not to it might sound like a selfish question at first, but it's meant to be a question of self-regard. In other words, if I'm going to practice any kind of leadership in the world, a first important step perhaps is to understand my own values. What do I believe in? What do I care about? What motivates me? What pushes me away? Why am I doing this in the first place? But he didn't stop there. The second question was, if I am for myself alone, what am I? And it's interesting he said what instead of who, because to be a who is to recognize that our fates are inextricably linked. it's kind of like my colleagues were saying earlier, comparing our struggles isn't the same as recognizing that we share a grand struggle together and that our fates are tied with one another's. And finally, if not now, when, which is not advice to move into running traffic without looking, but it is a suggestion that we avoid what Jane Addams calls the snare preparation, that feeling that you're never quite ready to do what you want to do. The suggestion is that learning comes from action, it doesn't precede it. And so I'd like to invite us to just to nail the last piece here is that he asked them as questions instead of answers, and it suggests that leadership is much more about learning than it is about having all the answers. And so really grateful for the opportunity to learn together here today.
Fantastic.
So thank you all for joining us. This is an amazing panel, and it just reminds me that white supremacy culture and white dominant culture is designed to separate us, and these are the conversations that bring us together, bring us to humanity, like you all have said. So that's why it's so important. Thank you all for really bringing yourselves and here with us, and thanks.
That's great.
I'm so glad we can finally have it in Milton.
Oh, absolutely.
I've been thinking about this one for a while, and the timing is right. So thank you all for making this possible. So we just want to tell you a little bit about what we've got coming up in our ongoing quest for learning and understanding. We can't change what we don't understand, and we can't understand unless we're going deep on some topics that are important for us. Turn green. Hold it for a minute. Let me see if it's behind. It might have come up in the behind. There you go. It's on. Awesome. So we have, we usually do monthly things. Well, we're catching up, I guess. We've got about 3 things coming up for November and then 1 for December. So just wanted to let everybody know what's coming up for some events and courageous conversations. Look at me. Touch it off. Hopefully it'll all cooperate. Well, we have a concert coming up this Saturday at First Parish Church from the Milton, there it is, the Milton Community Concert Series. And this one is featuring some amazing musicians paying tribute to Coretta Scott King. She has a really special anniversary coming up. I don't know, is it her 70th anniversary of graduating from the Boston Conservatory. So this is a really special concert. Free, though they will take donations to raise money for the League of Women for Community Service. So that's this Saturday at 7? Yes, at 7 p.m.
There's a tasty reception afterwards.
Yes. There needs to be like a remote that I can use to move it around. You can tell me that arrow. Anything? Yeah, maybe. No. All right, well, then I will just share with you. November 4th, that next Saturday, we are co-sponsoring an event with Fenway Community Health called Breaking Bread, We Ride Together panel. And it's a panel of Black women across the LGBTQ spectrum and trans women that are going to have a conversation about our intersectionality, differences, and the stigmas that exist in the Black community around LGBTQ issues, and particularly for Black trans women. So that's a powerful one. That's going to be at Fenway Community Health at 10 a.m. on November 4th. And it's kind of a brunch, but they're going to be sitting around really a table, kind of like the red table. So there's 5 well-known panelists in the community that are coming together for that. The book group, we have a book group coming up for November 14th. Does someone want to come up and talk about that? That would be great. Sorry, we don't have the slide. Let me see if I can get us there.
So on November 14th at 7 o'clock, we will be having a virtual book club. The book is a young adult book. It is also a book that has been challenged and I think banned in some states, and it's The Poet X. And it's a lovely book about a young woman who's coming to terms through poetry about a relationship with her mother and herself. It is a Latinx book. And I don't know, I'm enjoying it right now. It's a short book, so it is about 4 hours to read roughly. But we are doing that on the 14th. And then on December 5th, here we will be having another hybrid event where we will be talking about banned books. And that one will be here. We will have Milton Public Librarian, a librarian from Boston Public Library, the Milton Public School, and we will be learning what a banned book is, what a challenge book is, how this is affecting our school systems, our public library, education. Also hoping to have a couple of state senators who have some advocacy bills out right now, and some voices from some authors on how it's affecting their work.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. I am a member of Courageous Conversations. My name is Annette Correa.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming, and panelists, we hope we see you again.